Hi everyone, I'm Cory Anotado, the executive producer of Tell Us About Yourself, conversations with game show contestants. Our first season has come to a close, and our host Christian Carrion is taking a well-deserved break. He'll be back in the new year with new episodes of the podcast. Meanwhile, I'll be replaying some of our favorite episodes, giving you a chance to listen again to some of the greatest stories we have from the stars of your favorite game shows, the contestants. We couldn't do this without your help, so we appreciate you listening and supporting the podcast. We also could not have done this without the support of the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play. The National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong preserves the history of game shows, from the earliest panel shows and quiz scandals, to the games and puzzles of the 1970s, to the Big Money Network series, and the classic games now in prime time. You can learn more about the archives or the museum itself at their website, museumofplay.org. We would also appreciate if you visited our Patreon page. You can support the podcast for as little as $1 per month. You can check that out and more at patreon.com/packdude. Now, without further ado, here's an encore episode of Tell Us About Yourself, conversations with game show contestants.
I have so much banana ketchup at home. This is attacking me. It's so nice. Between my house and where we go to get groceries sometimes, there's a Filipino grocery store. So I always stop it. And Manang always looks and says, "Oh, you're back, huh?"
We've been there.
Yeah?
We've been there. We got the good noodles over there.
Yeah. Pandesal all day. All right. It is 2:05. Shall we begin?
Yeah, my stomach's bubbly. Let's do it.
Uh-oh.
No, we're okay.
Tell us about yourself, would you?
Tell us something about you.
For any new viewers, won't you tell us again about yourself?
We've met before, but let's meet again. Tell us about
What
yourself.
else can you tell us about yourself?
Perhaps you'd fill us in again and tell us about yourself.
Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to the first ever live episode of Tell Us About Yourself from SporcleCon in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Appreciate it. My name is Christian Carrion. I'm having a little bit of a surreal moment right now because I remember about a year ago when we started doing this podcast, this was literally me in my closet with headphones and a microphone. And to see how far it's come 50 episodes later, I'm just very appreciative of all the support and everybody who showed up today and everybody who's listened. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. One of the sort of philosophies around the show is this idea of honesty, this idea of presenting the experience as it was, and the idea that, warts and all, right? There are aspects of the contestant experience that some people who watch these shows don't realize. There are aspects of the show that, casual viewers aren't aware of. And so honesty, to me, is a big goal in terms of the conversations that I have. So in that vein, I'll be honest with you. I'm really nervous. I've never done this in front of people before, and I hope I can do it. But I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be talking to our guest today. Our guest is one of the stars of The Chase on ABC, also voted 2021's World Quizzer of the Year, played on the winning team in the 2021-22 Quizzing World Cup, and in 2005 was a Jeopardy champion, defeating a 19-day winner in the process. Victoria, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself.
Hi. Thank you.
No, you don't have. That's just the catchphrase that starts every episode. You don't have to do it right now. We'll edit that in. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
How are you about hearing your own voice? Would you watch yourself back? If you watch yourself back,
I do. Yeah.
And how do you feel about how do you feel about the way you sound and the way you present yourself? Are you sort of your own worst critic in that way? I am, but I wonder if you are too.
I feel like I am about the most awkward human who has ever walked the earth. So when I see myself on one of these things, the glam folks at the Chase, I cannot say enough nice things about them as humans, but also about as craftsmen. So like I feel like I have never looked, better or, more put together than I do on the show, which is, so in that case, it's like I'm seeing a version of me that I never see at home because I'm 95% of the time in yoga pants and a flannel shirt.
Sure. Well, your role on The Chase as well is one that requires a bit of, I kind of think of it like wrestling energy. You have to like turn your personality up to like this like animated sort of degree. And as a described awkward person, I wonder how much trouble you have putting that on day after day after day.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you picked up on that because I think that's something that people don't automatically notice who watch the show.
Right.
Like, you see comments about like, oh, she's really haughty or she's really, she's really nice, she's really whatever. And we're all kind of ourselves, but not.
Sure.
It's exactly what you said, like that wrestling energy. And I'll tell you, at first, when we were doing run-throughs on Zoom to prepare, like the very first run-through or two they did after they kind of told me they wanted me for the show, they wanted me to try to do like, okay, you live in a castle and have literal corgis.
Right.
And
like character development kind of thing.
Exactly. And so after the first run through, my producer calls and says, okay, 2 things. A, you can't act. They didn't actually say that, but but they're like, yeah, it doesn't work. They're like, the good news is we've determined that people find you terrifying even when you're just yourself.
Now, is that good news or bad news?
Oh, I think it's great news.
Okay, good. Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, for the for the kind of show that you're doing, I think that's exactly what you want. Yeah, I had the pleasure of talking to Mark Labette from the UK Chase, and he did the American one for a while, and he took a lot of inspiration from like 80s and 90s wrestlers for the amplification of his persona.
Yeah,
I wonder if
James very much does too.
Right. And I think that comes across. I wonder if you personally have any sort of, or had any sort of inspiration when it comes to how to put yourself out there like that.
I do, but it's maybe a little bit embarrassing. But
I think we're okay with that, right?
So I have this friend, and this friend, what's the best way to put it? He's single. He's actively looking for somebody, and what he wants is a woman who will step on him.
Okay.
So I was like, I think maybe.
Show of hands. How many people have thought about that at some point? At some point in their life.
1, 2,
Listen,
3. It's the whole room.
Okay. Now I know this room is cool.
That's right. So I was like, well, maybe I can try to project a little bit of, I have the capacity to step on people energy.
Okay. That's fun though. That feels.
It is, yeah.
That sounds empowering. That's how, as a self-described awkward person.
Very much so. Yeah.
That sounds like that's something that could be fun. That sounds like it'd be a lot of fun.
It is, and it's not like nearly as far off of who I am as I live in a palace and am very fancy and have multiple small dogs. I mean, I love dogs, but
right.
It is something that is within my capability in a way that being really haughty or really snooty,
sure,
not so much.
Something that you could turn on and off.
A little bit, yeah. I mean,
okay.
I think
because I imagine that that's a type of personality trait that could spill over into everyday life.
It possibly
and
could.
I won't pry into your personal, but it seems like at least a sort of mindset and a sort of, again, confidence, that idea of empowerment, that idea that you're one way here, but another way when the cameras turn on.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say it's kind of like, it's not 180 from my actual personality, but it probably is like 45.
Okay.
45 degrees.
Sure,
off.
sure. So it's in there.
It's
in there.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning. One of the questions that I always start these conversations with, I always love to know role game shows played in contestants' lives growing up. For me personally, it was something that informed everything I wanted to do with my life. Everything that I aspired to be was germinated from that love of this type of TV way back. So I wonder how important that type of TV was for you way before you became a contestant and became a known person.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family did watch game shows some. So I had a stay-at-home mom. And like my mom was one of these people who was very kind of very big into order and routine. So like every day it was the same shows on. So like I have a lot of memories of being homesick from school.
Right.
And, watching The Price is Right at 11 and watching Scrabble when that was on and Press Your Luck and everything. And the family did usually watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy after dinner. Because, it was dinner is served promptly at 6. And then 7 o'clock Wheel of Fortune comes on, and 7:30 Jeopardy comes on, and like the whole
everybody
family
with
watches.
the 7 o'clock at Wheel of Fortune thing. What is that? Did everybody grow up? It's like the Crips and the Bloods at SporcleCon. It's like two rival factions. It was always Jeopardy at 7 o'clock for me growing up. It's like going to another place and seeing Wheel of Fortune at 7. It feels like I'm in Narnia, like it's like another universe.
No, it was 7:30 for us.
And so game shows were important to your family.
Yeah, they were.
Emphasis on knowledge, education, was that something that was prioritized as well?
Very much.
Okay.
So my family was, I would say, emphasized competition a lot. Very big on, honorable and fair play, but be the best at something. That was very much kind of the ethos in my household growing up. So one of my older brother was mostly did that in sports. Like he was a football player. He ran track, soccer. My sister and I actually was mostly a musician growing up. So
right, I saw that on Jeopardy. That's how you introduced. Yeah. Well, that's how you were introduced as a musician.
Yeah. So I until I was in my late teens, I wanted to be a concert pianist. So I did do like academic competition growing up. Actually, the first game show I was ever on was Atlanta's High Q, the high school quiz bowl show. So right. My high school won like 10 years in a row there, and I was on a couple of those teams for that. But really, mostly at that age, I was focused on music because I wanted to be a concert pianist. I competed regionally and nationally, and spent a whole lot of time practicing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so going back to the idea of shows for a minute, because I think that what I've noticed from a lot of the conversations that I've had with contestants is that there's this idea, this commonality regarding performance, where a lot of people who grew up wanting to perform, wanting to be on stage, wanting to be in plays, class clowns, things like that, tend to gravitate towards this kind of TV because it's an easy in to the stuff that that your dreams are made of, essentially. Sure. And that was the case for me as well, like being close to cameras and being in that environment. Like I just any way I could do that, I wanted to do that. When did that idea sort of originate for you? That idea that you could be on a game show? Well, first of all, what kind of game shows spoke to you as a kid growing up? I mean, your family watched a lot of stuff. You said The Price is Right, Scrabble, and Press Your Luck, which aren't, I wouldn't necessarily call them intellectual material. There's a little bit of stuff in there, but they're very flashy.
Yeah, it was more a case of like, what is the best thing that is on during this time slot? Because it was like a household where the TV was mostly on during the day, so it was usually like the morning shows in the very beginning of the morning, and then game shows until the soap operas came on, and then the afternoon news, and then
and then TV was over.
And then
until 7 o'clock.
Well, then we went to because we didn't have the TV on during dinner. That would not have been allowed. Right. That kind of household.
Sure.
So when did I get the idea of being on? So I mean, probably as a kid, I definitely was interested in the idea of going on Jeopardy. Like, it was one of those households where everyone's shouting out the answers, and we played a lot of things like Trivial Pursuit. I did Quiz Bowl from elementary school on through high school. So like I had this idea that I could be good at this. I put in postcards for the high school and college tournaments, but never got an audition.
And so when was it that you finally began that process to become a contestant on Jeopardy? I mean, it was way after you were like a kid watching it with your family, right?
It was, yeah. So, let's see, 2004 was when I had my daughter. She was actually due on the day that Jennings lost his game to Nancy Zerg. Like, that was my daughter's due date. So a friend of mine had emailed me and been like, hey, Jeopardy's doing auditions in Atlanta, which is where I was living at the time, and you should go. You know, you'd be good. And I was on maternity leave.
Right.
So I was like, yeah, why not? I got an audition. So I would have been, it was either right before or right after I turned 24.
So wait a second. There is a noticeable lack of apprehension in that. Somebody just said, hey, you'd be good at that. And you just said, yeah, I would. And you just went.
Yeah.
When did this, again, self-described awkwardness kick in? Was that a fear at all? Like, a lot of the contestants that I talk to are worried about being in TV, especially on a show like Jeopardy. That's like so contestant focused. Like, that wasn't a worry at all?
Now that you're saying this, I should have been nervous.
Well, I'm just wondering because, like, again, that's like I feel like that's a common fear among people who go for this kind of thing, and especially that show, like, to be embarrassed.
I'd never really thought about it that way, but that never occurred to me.
Good, don't. Good.
Like, with the chase, it has quite a bit.
Sure.
But with Jeopardy, it never did, and I think maybe part of that goes back to, like you were saying, people who were very interested in performance. I was never really interested in being a character in any way, but I was on stage all the time doing music. I sang in choirs. I accompanied musical groups and did weddings and everything. So the idea of I go in front of people and just do a thing that I'm really good at, that idea had been normalized for me from day one in a lot of ways.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's a good skill set, I think, to develop like at an early age. I mean, I do a lot of this type of thing and talking and going on shows and stuff, and I'm nervous every time. But I think it's just a natural sort of nervousness. I think people are just naturally sort of apprehensive to put themselves out. I wonder if you, and I think I have, to a certain degree, I wonder if you've developed any skills growing up as somebody who was doing a lot of performing that would calm you down, that would make you less nervous if you were nervous for a performance. What did you do for yourself to like bring yourself back down to that level that you could
I was rarely nervous for what you'd call kind of regular performances.
Okay.
So like by the time I was done with high school, being in front of a few hundred people and just doing a thing was very normal to me. I did sometimes get nervous for especially like really big competitions. I would try to kind of, the deep breathing and everything to try to just kind of slow myself down. With music, there was always a risk that I would get nervous. I'd play too fast.
Sure.
And kind of get a little bit ahead of myself that way.
That's a common thing. Whether it's music or it's even just like speech, people talk too fast and they perform too fast, and that's just like a natural thing. And maybe it's just like that sort of natural inclination to just like get it over with, like hurry up, do your thing and go.
I think it's your heart racing. I think that's a lot of it.
What do you mean?
Well, like if your heart is really just kind of pounding when you're doing something, it's kind of like you've got a metronome that's going faster than it normally does. I think it just makes everything speed up. That's always been my hypothesis about it.
Just kind of performing according to your inner clock.
Kind of,
yeah. I hear you. Interesting. And so tell me about when you found out you were going to make it on Jeopardy. I mean, the process is fabled at this point. There's the first test and the second test and the mock game and the pool, and you get picked. Tell me if you remember, which I'm sure you do, where you were, how you found out about it, what your reaction was to that news.
Yeah. So this actually, my husband's over here. He knows where this is going. So my husband took the call.
Okay.
And he saw that it was an unfamiliar area code, and he assumed it was a telemarketer. So when they called to ask for me, He's like, I'm sorry, she's not available. Can I take a message? And they're like, oh, it's Jeopardy. And she's like, I think I hear her coming in right now.
As a matter of fact.
Yeah. And they were like, oh, no, don't worry about it. We don't want to rush, just, we'll call back. So they called later that night, or I don't know if I called them or if they called. I don't remember, but it was one of the two. So it would have been in. Well, it probably would have been in June of the year I taped. I taped in July. I probably found out beginning of June, and this was a really weird time in our life. And the reason is, so we had this young baby, and while I was on maternity leave, my husband had taken a job out of state.
Okay.
So he was in process of moving from Atlanta to Pittsburgh when I got the call.
Sure.
And he had been kind of doing this thing where for a couple months he was a couple weeks home and then a couple weeks there. And then by the time I taped, he was 100% in Pittsburgh, and I was just home with the baby. So like I left her for the first time to tape, for more than like an hour or two to go and tape Jeopardy.
Nerve-wracking. Wow.
Honestly, that was my biggest source of nerves going in. Was I was not okay about leaving my daughter. So I was there in LA for as short a time as I could possibly manage.
Sure.
Like I took an evening flight in and then a red eye back. Wow. So I was there for probably like 30 hours.
Well, nerve-wracking too, especially in the context of all the paper shuffling that has to happen in order to make a trip to Jeopardy happen, because they don't get you there. You have to get yourself there.
Yeah.
So, organizing the logistics of it, I can imagine that all that pressure is sort of magnified by the circumstances that you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did go with my sister. So
Right.
I expect she booked the hotel and everything. So that probably made things a little bit easier. But yeah, figuring out, can Phil come down to look after Nora for a couple days? And then when that didn't work, can my parents do it? That was very hectic.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So my co-executive producer, Cory Anotado, which, by the way, Cory helped set all this up. He's been my trusted producer for all 50 episodes of this show so far. Cory was on Jeopardy a couple years ago, and he had he ran into the circumstances of what I refer to as being thrown into the wood chipper. You kind of arrived to the show, and there was somebody who had won game after game after game after game, and you were just sort of next in line for that.
Getting ready to get eaten up and spit out, yeah.
Right. And so from what I understand, that is well, tell me how that feels to like be thrown into that.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I started the entire journey of me being on Jeopardy just telling my close friends, I don't expect to win. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to have the best time in the world, but I make no qualms that I have as much knowledge as what a Jeopardy champ should have.
Sure, and then getting on the show is like the prize in and of itself.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. So I went in very lackadaisically, and then when I heard, at the start of the show or at the start of the tape day, when they say, they start to do the briefings, and then they say, "Oh, Amy, I know you've heard this already." And then they say, Amy is our champion. She's won over $1 million. I just kind of did this. I leaned back and I just started to slouch a little bit and just get settled into the knowledge that, nah, it's not my day. Right. But it didn't really bother me too much because I knew I didn't have any grand illusions of being a super duper Jeopardy champion.
Sure.
And, the thought processes running through my head were like, this is going to be fun. What if she sets a record on that day? I'm there.
Right.
What if I do beat her? That would be cool too. So for me, someone who, and I might be different than most people because this is not my first rodeo at the time. So I'm just happy to be there, having the best day of my life. And, it just made the story better for me, and I realized that, and that's probably from experience.
Sure, that you're there for something sort of notable.
Exactly.
And so, Victoria, when you had your opportunity to appear on Jeopardy, we're up against, at that point, a 19-day champion, David Madden. Tell me what that feeling was, if you remember that feeling in particular.
Yeah.
Or was there a feeling? Did you go into it saying, kind of like Cory was saying, that there's this person who's won and won and won and won again. I don't know that I have a chance, but we'll just have some fun. How did you feel about entering into those circumstances?
So I was in the very rare position of, because my tape date was the second one after they came back from summer break, I'd actually seen him on TV.
Oh, okay.
He was airing around the time that I taped.
Right.
And I will say that my parents were not fans.
Sure.
So, I going forward, I can say that, like, I called my dad that night. My dad cackled.
That's amazing. What about him were they not a fan of? Was it just one of those?
I think just demeanor. You know the way people are.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Jeopardy has those kinds of ebbs and flows.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I think they really liked people who were maybe a little bit more, in terms of what kind of contestants did they really like. Mom definitely tends towards, liking people who are, bubbly and humble, I think.
Sure.
It's her preferred flavor of Jeopardy contestant.
Well, I feel like those are two good qualities for like a Jeopardy contestant, because you want somebody that can be rooted for,
Right,
and I feel like, that's what you want. And
But not everybody does. Like, I know people who find people who are really bubbly and everything kind of annoying, but that's not them. That's not my folks.
True. That's true. And I think that there is a sort of perverse enjoyment in watching annoying contestants on Jeopardy day after day. There is something to that. You know what I mean? Where it's I hate them, but I can't look away.
I mean, there's a reason that we have, the term hate watch.
Right. Exactly.
So going back to your original question,
right.
Like, what was it like? So I think, if I'm remembering right, I think he was one of the last people on the shuttle. And how they tape multiple tape days kind of in a week. My tape day was the second one of the week. So a couple of contestants had been held over from the day before. Mm-hmm. So I knew on the shuttle that he had been, it was the same person that I'd been watching, before I left. And B, that he had a very, very close loss the day before that had a very, very close win, like a game that was very losable.
Oh, okay. Understood.
That got all the contestants in the tape day very excited.
Right.
So
right.
People were talking about that before he even showed up.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the moment when I, was like, okay, I guess game's on.
Jeopardy to me is so intimidating. The thought of getting on Jeopardy, the thought of holding the button and standing at the podium and just being in the studio for that experience is like I just passed a Jeopardy test and I had my audition today. And thank you. Hold your applause, please. But the entire time I couldn't shake this feeling. And I was telling Cory the other day, I couldn't shake this feeling of like, how did I pass that test? How did I pass that test? How did I pass the test? How did I pass that test? I cannot believe I passed that test. And there's like this imposter syndrome that sort of sets in. Like, how did that happen? As somebody whose knowledge is sort of trumpeted and celebrated, is that something that you ever struggle with?
Yes.
Tell me how.
Yeah. I'm trying to collect my thoughts here for a moment. I won't sit here forever.
No. That's okay.
It's a really good question, and I want to give it an answer that does it justice. So, I work really, really, really hard at this. It's something that I've been very, very overt about. Is that I study like an absolute demon ever since I got into quiz as a hobby. Which is after I was on Jeopardy, really. Like, I did Quiz Bowl and stuff, but like at this point in my life, like competing internationally in quiz stuff, this is my hobby, and I work really hard at it. And the more you learn, the biggest thing you learn is how much you don't know.
Right.
It's like every new thing I learn about opens up, 5 or 6 more that are worth knowing about that I don't. So I'm always very conscious that, you cannot fill in all the gaps in your knowledge. Even with something like Jeopardy, where, people are like, it's studyable because there are things that come up over and over and over again. I don't think it's possible to say I'm going to know 100% of what's on this show 100% of the time, no matter how good you are. And if you have a day where things just don't hit you, when you're in public, that's kind of a referendum on, are you good?
Right.
And that's, that's a pretty heavy thing.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I found while I was studying for Jeopardy, the biggest worry that I had was if I didn't know something, that's of course what's going to come up. That's of course what's going to be on the test. And so once that list gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because once you start sort of gathering all the things you don't know, it could be a formidable sort of list, and you realize like, oh my God, I don't know anything. You know what I mean? It's that feeling of like how, it's
like, I didn't realize until I was studying for Jeopardy just how little I knew about movies.
Right.
Like, I because it was not ever a thing I had to really think about much. I would just miss all the pink questions in Trivial Pursuit and go on with my life. Sure. But, while studying for Jeopardy, I was like, I don't know who directed like anything.
Right.
Famous actors, whatever. I'm not a big movie watcher, so.
In your experience, is there a way to study things like film without watching all the movies?
Yeah. In fact, it would be really hard to become a great film quiz player by watching all the movies. Like, you would have to be very, very devoted to it and probably watch like a movie or two almost every day.
Right.
And I am now considered a pretty elite film player academically, and I still don't watch very many movies and fall asleep, during like half of the ones I do attempt to watch. No matter how much I'm enjoying a movie, I can fall asleep in the middle.
Right. And same, I'm the same way.
So, I mean, for film specifically, there's a whole lot of list knowledge. Like, if here's a movie, here's the, 1 to 3 top line stars, here's the director, here's a one-line synopsis of the plot, that will get you 90% of questions that will come up about all but the kind of most famous movies. And then the rest of it you just patch up by writing by people who love movies.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I guess you could extend that to other areas of study as well. I mean, geography comes to mind, and capitals, and all the stuff that Jeopardy seems to ask about on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, with Jeopardy, geography is very listy.
Right. So you won.
So I won.
You won your game, and you defeated David again after a 19-day run. Put me in that place. Tell me what that was like. Tell me what that experience was. What was your category? What was your final? Do you remember?
It was something along the lines of famous names, and it was clear that it was going to be history. And they had told us, we want you to be very specific with your answer. And that's all the information they gave us before Final Jeopardy. Okay. So I think they wanted to it was something
off camera they say this.
Off camera they said that. Right. Yeah, and it was and they had said like this person, Pope, I think it was like a pope had the title of Pontifex Maximus. 2,000 years prior, this person had the same title.
Okay.
I believe it was something very close to that.
Right.
And the answer was Julius Caesar. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the instructions they gave us, to be very specific, definitely got me thinking on the metagame side, like, okay, this is going to be somebody where there's an alternative answer that could be confused with them if I just, said Caesar.
Right. Which Final Jeopardy is a puzzle. It's not a question. It's a puzzle. Yeah.
So like, I was thinking of, people like, I was thinking of Julius Caesar, obviously, but I was also thinking of other people who would have been, I think the year was maybe pegged to 30 BC. I forget. Mm-hmm. 50 BC. I forget. But I was thinking of other people like in the first triumvirate or something. And I was like, well, most of those you can't confuse with somebody else, but Julius Caesar you could if you just said Caesar. So that's the way I went.
Right. And tell me again what you won as a result of your time on Jeopardy.
It was about $23,000. $1,000.
And so what does that, and this can be personal, financial, or otherwise, what does this victory bring to your life? What are you able to do as a result of this achievement? What are you able to see? What attention did you get as a result of winning Jeopardy? I imagine there was a little bit of attention. I mean,
there was,
yeah.
and it was actually pretty off-putting.
Right.
You mentioned in other places that I actually got a death threat against my daughter, who was 9 months old at the time. So like we file a police report and everything.
Oh, that's horrible. I'm so sorry about that.
I mean, it's obviously quite far in the past. She started college now. So
yeah, sure. But it's still, that's very unfortunate.
It was very distressing.
Right.
Most of the attention I got from it was, I don't think it's anything like what people go through now.
Oh no, with Twitter and
right,
being
exactly,
able to
like
gauge everyone's live reactions.
Right, exactly. So I mean, I think that if it had happened 10 years later, it would have been a very different experience for me. But 2005, it was, it was mostly just a flurry of, stress here, but other, excitement.
Right.
I had some people that I had kind of lost touch with who, were like, I saw you. This was very exciting. Got back in touch with some folks. It was very cool.
Right.
And then it just kind of passed after that.
I imagine.
Mostly, yeah. I'm not exactly somebody who craves attention.
Right.
I like having my nice, quiet life.
Sure. But I mean, there had to have been a part of that felt pretty neat.
Oh, it was super exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, so like, it was really cool to have, so many people that I, liked and respected get in touch with me and everything. And certainly people I think there was still an active board that Sony ran, the Jeopardy forums there. So people were very excited there. But, I would say mostly a flurry of just big excitement because at the time, David had the second longest streak in Jeopardy history. So it was a very big deal.
Right.
But after a few weeks or so,
not in any rush to stay in there and kind of get back to your regular life. Yeah, I understand. Is there a direct path between your time on Jeopardy and the invitation to participate in the chase? How much did that experience factor in to the idea that you could be a character on this show? Because I know you have done other quizzing stuff in the interim, but I wonder. So I wonder if that was brought up at all in that conversation.
I would say not a ton.
Right.
I don't know whether me having been on Jeopardy was a factor, and if so, pro or con in terms of casting for the chase. They've never really said anything to me one way or the other about was being a Jeopardy giant killer like something that they were thinking about in terms of casting. I will say that even if they wanted specifically a woman, if they were going off of Jeopardy resumes, there are hundreds of women with much stronger Jeopardy resumes than I have.
Sure.
So my sense is it didn't play a big role in terms of them considering me for the show.
In your estimation, was there anything about you other than your quizzing ability that made you stand out as a potential chaser?
Ooh. I think you would have to ask the producers and not me. My impression when they first got in touch with me was like, okay, I'll talk to them, but I didn't think there was any reason that they would, go with me ultimately.
Right.
I figured it would likely be either Pam Mueller or Muffy Morocco, who I know you've talked to.
Right. Oh, she was a delight. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I figured it would be somebody who both has the quizzing chops and also here's a TV resume that we can point to when we're saying, why did we choose this person?
Right. I would love to know more about the way that you prepare for the chase from a studying standpoint. How do you keep yourself sharp?
Yeah. So I play a lot of competitive quiz. Some of that's online, some of it's in person. Only some of it is, I would say, really relevant to American TV game show stuff.
Right.
The big reason being that just every competition has its own collection of things that are kind of in range. Jeopardy's going to ask you a lot of, Americana. They're going to ask you a lot of, a friend of mine is preparing for the Tournament of Champions right now, and we kind of describe it as like midbrow NPR.
Sure.
The Chase is more pop culture-y than Jeopardy. So there's, it's interlocking Venn diagrams. And then a lot of the stuff I do is just way out here. Like, they're just not going to ask me about, like, what's the national dish of Uzbekistan?
Right.
It is plov.
There we go.
Yeah. But the other stuff I do absolutely will. So,
right.
It's I use a flashcard app called Anki. And I do about, it really depends on what I'm preparing for and various other factors, burnout being a big one.
Yeah.
But in general, I probably do between 1 and 3 hours a day doing that.
What do you do when you're burnt out? What other activities provide that sort of solace for you when you're tired of studying and you're tired of answering stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I am. I think my husband has described me before as kind of a weaponized executive function machine. So I usually do just kind of power through, but I cut back. I try to exercise most days. I'm not one of these people who gets a endorphin buzz from I'm so jealous of people who do.
Right. They get that like pleasure from.
Yeah, like you run and it makes you feel good. No, I'm like, I run and it makes me want to die.
Exercise is horrible.
Yeah.
And I'll say that on record. Exercise is a terrible thing to do, and I don't think anyone should do it.
Same. I'm on record there too.
There we go. So 3 out of 3.
That's right.
Don't exercise.
In fact, I'm actually kind of rehabbing an injury this week because I fell off a rock climbing wall.
Oh no!
Sunday.
Oh, I'm so
okay,
sorry.
but I hurt my knee.
Right.
So I do try to exercise most days because I feel like I don't like it while I'm doing it, but I feel like having done it is pretty good for me.
Sure.
So I try to do like yoga and like rock climbing now and some rowing. Cooking. Mm-hmm. We were talking about this before we started, but I love cooking.
Right.
So if I'm, really just in a mood where I will get something really, really elaborate and try a new recipe. I read a huge amount.
Yeah.
So like most days I'm in the bathtub for an hour with a book, and like you can actually tell how well my life is going by the size of the stack of books next to the bathtub.
Oh, that's handy.
Yeah, because if it's really high, that means that I have had enough time to take an hour out most days and sit and read. And if it's short, that means that I'm, rushing around and like popping in for a shower for 10 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
You ever meditate?
A friend of mine's trying to get me to try, so I'm trying this app called Healthy Minds.
Okay.
But I just started doing it.
I do. I started
like
a few years ago. I do like it. And how do I describe this? The way you're describing your studying regimen and what you do to relax and reading, it sounds like there are a lot of words up here. And for me personally, it's not from a studying standpoint, but just in general, I feel like there are a lot of words up here sometimes, and learning how to meditate helped me just kind of like, it's almost like a little bit of dish liquid and like greasy water just kind of dissipates, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what that did for me personally. But I wondered, as somebody who is seemingly always taking in information, if that was something that you ever employed to sort of.
Well, like I said, I'm just starting to try to do it on a friend's recommendation.
Right.
So we'll see how that goes. I think yoga is probably the closest thing I do to that.
Yoga's great.
Yoga is great.
Oh my God, it's great. Let's talk about the idea of protectiveness. So like you had mentioned, I had the pleasure of talking to Muffy Morocco a few weeks ago, and she is one of the experts on masterminds, and she had mentioned this idea that she has an elevated level of empathy for the people who face her on that show. And I remember her words, she said, it's not your everyday. She said, it's not your everyday that you put yourself out there and put your knowledge to the test in that way. And her being a former Jeopardy contestant and being on other shows as well, she has that firsthand knowledge of what that experience is like. Do you feel a similar level of protectiveness over the contestants who face you on the
Absolutely. And it's because the chase really puts the contestants out there in a way that not all shows do. Because if you're on Jeopardy, you're directly competing against other people. Right. There's stuff going on, even if you're not buzzing into a question. And yeah, sometimes people have a really rough day and the internet will drag them. Or sometimes people have a really good day and people on the internet will drag them because the internet is terrible. But ultimately, you as a contestant on most things with multiple people, you are not strictly speaking responsible for making the engine go.
Right.
But on the chase, you are. You're out there very publicly. And if you have, particularly in the cash builder, if you have a rough time at it, you're just kind of out there hanging. It's hard.
Right. Well, not to mention, I think there's also this added level of, some people might consider it embarrassment, but there's this idea that like you're not pulling your weight.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're first up for the cash builder and you don't pull your weight for that, for the rest of the show you're looking like a sponge because you were, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You did just like the bare minimum and you're still taking part in whatever you might win.
Yeah. It's almost never the case. Like in general, you are always better off with an extra person getting home, even if they don't have, even if they're not adding much to the bank.
Don't I know it?
But I do hate when people do that, though, because this person is contributing to the team, even if they're not like the person who's putting a giant number in the bank or the person who's getting most of the questions in the final chase.
Right. I might leave this in, I might not, but
we know you're not going to edit this.
That's right. Our team did so bad they brought us for In-N-Out Burger after the show. It was like losing the pennant and going to Friendlies afterwards.
I mean, I think they felt so bad for you specifically, they brought you back to LA to tape more stuff, right?
Yeah, they said so. It was Bob Bowden who. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Bob said something about they needed to get a reaction shot. So for this reaction shot, they flew me again from New York to Los Angeles. And put me down. Yeah, really? And they brought me to it was ITV in Los Angeles. And they brought me there for maybe 15 minutes. And they got a quick reaction shot for me, and they got like the post game like little interview thing at the end over the credits. And then Bob Bowden shook my hand and said, "Do me a favor, keep the beard off just in case." And a decade later, I'm doing this podcast for him. So things, I mean, I'm sure you know that opportunities lead to opportunities.
Absolutely,
opportunities. Yeah. But going back to what you were talking about, The Chase is such a different show in that there is that, like, it's almost like a group project and you didn't do all your work. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
I know exactly what you mean.
You have to be on top. And then not to mention the idea that as a contestant on The Chase, the odds are sort of stacked against you from the jump because you're facing somebody who is ostensibly an expert in general knowledge.
That's
you know
interesting because to me it feels like the show is strongly favors the contestants.
Do you think so?
I do.
Well, the American Chase is different in that way because I feel like they specifically look for
they've had a lot of really accomplished people as contestants.
Right.
But I mean, just structurally, like if you drew any three chasers out of a hat and had them face the other, the three would win. If you give 3 extra steps and the chance for pushbacks, like that's
a fair point. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I guess I'm thinking about it in comparison to when I was in college. I would catch up on the UK Chase like via BitTorrent, and so that was something I watched every day. And the angle of the UK Chase seems to be that they're everyday people.
Very much are.
It's a very David and Goliath kind of thing, and I think that they capitalized on that dynamic, which I thought was super entertaining. I enjoyed the American Chase as well, but it is different.
It's
in that
a very
way.
different vibe.
It's like a Clash of the Titans kind of thing.
And I think a lot of this comes down to kind of the vicissitudes of being daily versus prime time.
Right, that's fair. Yeah.
Because if it's every day, you need a huge number of contestants, and there aren't that huge quantity of people who can really go toe to toe with the chasers that we have.
And so by nature, you almost have to be protective of that, of them in that way.
Yeah.
And again, as somebody who's been through that whole process and knows what it takes to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
You know, in closing, and by the way, thank you very much for
my pleasure. Thank
doing
you for
this.
inviting me.
Having so much fun. I'm very grateful that you took the time. One of the things I never thought about when I became a contestant on a show was the idea of reruns. The idea that years from now, I could see myself at age 20 and cringe and do all the things that you do when you see old video and old photos and old audio of yourself, that could happen at any point in the future, because I signed the paperwork. They have it, and they can put it out wherever. Do you ever think about that from your point of view? Do you ever think about the idea that you might see yourself as you are now 30 years from now? Do you ever reflect on what you're putting out there in terms of media?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about it now.
Take all the time you need.
Yeah.
While she's thinking, I'll let you know, I was on cable in the classroom for about a decade.
Oh, wow.
What do you mean?
JEP was part of cable in the classroom. So teachers
that's
were
right, because it was
allowed
like educational TV.
Yeah. So a lot of teachers around the country would tape it and show it in their classes. So, yeah, sorry, America.
Cool. And how did you feel about it, real quick?
It was trippy because, I mean, for a while, it was like I was, in 5th grade. I don't want anyone seeing that.
But you're young enough at that age that you're not worried about the social, I look terrible. Yeah. You're a kid.
Exactly. It's like when I got a little older and I still realized, people are still watching this.
Right.
And I'm like, this is cringe. And then you get over that hump as you grow older.
No, but I wonder, Victoria, as that, as that character, you ever think about seeing that years from now?
I mean, I think it would be okay. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think I'll be really kind of proud to, look back when I'm, 70 and be like, hey, I was a badass.
Right. That's true. And one of the things that I've always, one of the things that I've noticed in these experiences, because again, I've talked to dozens of people at this point, and whether they've won millions of dollars or they've won nothing, or they were on a show in the 50s or the 80s or the 90s or last month, the idea that it is never not fun to talk about it.
No,
it's always fun. It's always a fun story. And it's always I hope this is the case for you, that it's always a positive experience to look back on.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a weird thing. Jeopardy in particular is a weird one to look back on, but only because it was such a blur, because of the circumstances around it that meant that I had such a rushed trip, and I don't have a lot of super clear memories of the trip because it was so just, flurry of activity.
Right. One of the things about Jeopardy that I admire, just as an outsider looking in, especially
hopefully not for long.
Hopefully not for long. But in the case of Cory, I know that Cory has made friends that he will have for years and years as a result of his experience on Jeopardy. I wonder if you could speak to the camaraderie that a show like Jeopardy brings.
Oh, yeah. So I got to actually see and hug one of my opponents from my first Jeopardy game while I was here. Steve Kaltenball's here.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, I got to see him and catch up a little bit. Now there is a very active alum community for a lot of games, and the number of people I've met who kind of connected with that community, it gives you something in common with people to kind of break the ice.
Sure.
And a lot of people who were on these shows have, certain things in common. I'm way more likely to find somebody that I can share a book recommendation with, out of these groups, because it's a lot of people who grew up as nerdy kids like me.
Sure. It's a shared positive experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Victoria, thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
It was so much fun. Thank you very much. And now, this is the part of the show where I have to remember my outro.
I told you to write it.
I don't need it. I don't know. Wait. All right, here we go. Wait. Wait for the... Right there. Tell us about yourself. Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Christian Carrion, from my studio, typically in beautiful downtown Lancaster City, Pennsylvania. Co-executive producer, Cory Anotado. Researcher, Chuck Donegan. This has been a production of BuzzerBlog, the most popular game show website in the world. in conjunction with the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. For more information, visit museumofplay.org. Thank you for listening. I'm Christian Carrion. Good night. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you again. So much fun. Thank you. Thank you. Can you stay a second? We have the clip. We can fade it out. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you very much.
Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced in partnership with the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, one of the largest history museums in the United States, and one of the leading museums serving families with highly interactive exhibits and programs. Since 1968, the Strong Museum has been dedicated to exploring the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. And their National Archives of Game Show History. Founded by industry veterans Bob Bowden and Howard Blumenthal, the archive is home to thousands of artifacts representing over 80 years of broadcasting, including props, set designs, video interviews with game show professionals, and other iconic elements from the history of television at play. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History or the Strong National Museum of Play, visit museumofplay.org or call area code 585-263-2700. Hey everyone, this is Christian Carrion. Thank you so much for listening to our first ever live episode of Tell Us About Yourself. We are incredibly proud of the way it came out. We're proud of the reception that it got at SporcleCon in front of that live audience, and we are incredibly grateful that you've been listening to our show for 50 episodes. It's hard for me to believe how well this project has been received. It's resonated with so many people. And when I first had the idea to do the show back in October of last year, I brought it before the group at the Strong Museum in a Zoom meeting where we talked about how BuzzerBlog could be of assistance in promoting the National Archives of Game Show History as the word was getting out about that project, and to see how far this project has come in that time has been a great source of inspiration for me. This is one of the most creatively fulfilling things I've ever done, and I am excited to bring you more. On that note, if you've seen the episode description, you know this, but this is the last episode, 50th and last episode of the current series of Tell Us About Yourself. We will be back with a new season, but this part of the year, October, November, and December, hold personal significance for me and my family. Not to mention Christmas and Thanksgiving, which are very important holidays for me in the context of being able to spend time with my family. But it's also the anniversary of my wife's father's passing. He passed away back in November, and that month, November in particular, has just become a very emotionally significant time, not just for me, but for her and all the family that surrounds us. And so I am taking this time to have a little bit of self-reflection, get a little re-energized, spend time with family, enjoy the season, and I'll be back with new episodes of Tell Us About Yourself. Mark my words, and I'll even tell you right now, let me look at the calendar. Mark this date, Saturday, January 13th, I will return with brand new episodes of Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants, produced, as always, as a partnership between the beautiful Strong Museum of Play, which I got to visit this year. Thank you, Chris, for the tour. It was a life-changing experience. And BuzzerBlog, the most popular game show website in the world. Where else do you go for game show news and reviews and this show? Where else do you get this but BuzzerBlog? Thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Christian Carrion. Please enjoy this season with your family. Enjoy the holidays. And I'll see you in a few weeks. Good night.